For every living man, woman, and child in this country, I could take a dump truck and dump 250 pounds to 500 pounds of chemicals in their front yard on a daily basis. Is how much we've got in our environment right now. In the 70s, when we had the OPEC oil crisis, remember all the speed limits went down to 50, 55 miles an hour. That was a minor inconvenience. But the major problem was that they changed the building codes to make the homes more airtight so they could conserve on the cost of the heating fuel for the winter, particularly in the Northeast. Well, that air tightness now decreased the circulation of air through your home, and now you've got all this off-gassing from the paints and the furniture and the fabrics and the finishes on your hardwood floors and, the Glade plugins and the Febreze fabric softeners and all the smell good stuff that people wanted to have to cover up the smell of the mold that they had in their house and get rid of the musty smell. That indoor air pollution actually became worse than outdoor air pollution.
Welcome to the Deeper Healing Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Howley. This is for everyone who's been dismissed, misdiagnosed, or told to just live with it and refuse to accept that answer. You're going to hear amazing patient recovery stories, raw and real in their own words. People who found answers after everything had failed them. You're going to hear from medical experts we trust that are pioneering new approaches to healing the body, because we deeply know we're designed to heal. Let's dig in.
We have a very special guest here today. We have Dr. Michael Bauerschmidt with Deeper Healing, the medical director, and we have Robert Rodgers coming all the way from Oregon. He is founder of the Parkinson's Recovery, and he's an author of a Parkinson's Recovery book, and I believe you have a lot of passion for Parkinson's. So why don't we roll right into it? How did you get into this, Robert?
Well, I had been a faculty member for a number of years at the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Kentucky. And the truth of the matter was that my mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and she wound up taking a number of different medications for Parkinson's and other kind of conditions. Unfortunately, Mom died of a stroke that was really prompted by taking, I think, 12 or maybe 14 or 15 different prescription medications. And she really, at the end of her life, I don't think was even aware of what she was taking. I was sitting in front of her and she was just popping pills one after another. And I said, well, Mom, what are you taking that for? And she said, well, I don't know, but I just think I need it. So I really thought, okay, it seems to me, speaking as a researcher, I can't think of a more challenging task or research agenda to embrace than to begin to investigate, okay, what really is causing these symptoms that are associated with the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease? And better yet, what type of natural options and treatments and therapies and methods and approaches can people embrace that will enable them to celebrate a relief from their symptoms? So I decided, okay, I'm just going to change my research program. I'm going to kind of step out of these tenured faculty appointments, and I'm just going to set up Parkinson's Recovery. So I founded that in 2004.
Well, that's an amazing, amazing passion. Why don't we let Dr. B take on that big question, top environmental physician?
Well, you mentioned a couple of good points. One is the polypharmacy that many of our elderly are subjected to, oftentimes needlessly in my position. The basic concept that I operate under is I have two basic rules. One, the diagnosis is not the disease. And number two, it's always about everything. And what I mean by that is you're absolutely correct. You mentioned the constellation of symptoms that we call Parkinson's disease. And this kind of goes back. My father was a HVAC, heating, ventilation contractor. And I'd go on service calls with him every now and again. I just found it amazing that he'd be able to pinpoint the problem. It says, yes, the furnace is broken, but here's the problem. And then backtrace it to the reason why it broke to begin with. And that really is not what we do in medicine. We make the diagnosis and then we write a prescription. And that is treating, it's like trying to put out the fire without arresting the arsonist, or trying to bail a boat without finding the leak. It's an exercise in futility that will buy some temporary relief, but doesn't solve the long-term problem. So my goal has been, find the reason that they have the symptom and treat that as opposed to just treating the symptom. So long as we're in this chasing our tail, our pharmaceutical tail of symptom, treatment, diagnosis, treatment, we're never going to advance medicine. So that raises the second question as well. If we need to find out why things are broken, it's really kind of necessary to understand how we work to begin with. And when you start asking that question, you get a lot of quizzical looks on people's faces about, well, how do we work? And you're a researcher, right? Okay, and your research was in biology, psychology. What was it in?
Well, I was more into human resources, organizational behavior, but I also wound up becoming the director of the health administration program. So I began to get involved in a lot of the health administration issues, and then I transferred over into really looking at more the factors that cause these particular symptoms.
Right. And so you really are kind of a systems approach guy. And if the system's broken, what is it upstream that caused the break downstream?
Right.
Well, if you try to look at that for the human body, you kind of go down to, if you keep going to what causes this, it all comes down to the very thing that keeps us alive is also the very reason why we can't live forever. And, we're alive despite that first and second law of thermodynamics that should have us in an early grave. The first law of thermodynamics being energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but it can be changed. And we don't violate that law because we can take one molecule of glucose and through the magic of biochemistry, turn it into 26 or more molecules of ATP, which is our energy currency. But the second law of thermodynamics states that everything is going to, any system is going to go to maximum randomness, minimum free energy, which is, for human beings, a little pile of minerals and a lot of water vapor scattered across the universe. So what keeps us organized, quite literally organized, is our ability to change that molecule of glucose into energy. But every time we do that, the basic chemical equation that allows that, a thing called reduction oxidation, also states that every time we make that molecule of energy, we also make this free radical or oxidant. And oxidation is the process by which things rust. So the very thing that keeps us alive is also the very blueprint of why we can't live forever. We're basically slowly rusting. We cannot change that second law of thermodynamics. God knows I've been looking for an answer for the last 10 years or so. And the older I get, the more urgent I find that need. But I haven't come up with it yet.
The one thing that I love that you always say is, I want us to rust more slowly.
Yeah.
And I want us to have as long a quality life as possible.
Yeah.
So Parkinson's will obviously steal our quality. What are the things that you see that can be underlying Parkinson's?
And actually, I was leading up to that in my own roundabout, very circuitous way. But, because if you understand the framework of how we get sick and the whole concept of deeper healing is to address those things that make us rust more quickly. A bad diet is going to rust us more quickly. Emotional stressor is going to rust us more quickly. The more we pull the fire alarm in the brain, the less we can be in rest and repair mode, the more in fight or flight mode. I believe I was just listening to just a previous podcast that you did about emotions and illness. I think you were addressing this very topic. Then the third is the environment, which is the enormous amount of toxicants toxins and toxicants, toxins being biologic, toxicants being man-made, that we're exposed to that accelerate our rusting. Metals, molds, chemicals, indoor air pollution, and then finally the new thing, electromagnetic fields. But all these things will accelerate our rusting. And then finally, what's wrong with us physically? Well, if we've had a traumatic brain injury, we're gonna screw things up in the central nervous system. Hormone dysregulation, just high blood pressure, so whatever other physical ailment we have that just demands energy and takes it away. So for me, I don't care. You can call the diagnosis Parkinson's disease. You can call it multiple sclerosis. You can call it myasthenia gravis. You can call it autism. You can call it whatever, ADHD. Call it whatever you want. To me, it's neuroinflammation. What is the cause of the inflammation? Where is the inflammation coming from that's causing this dysregulation in our nervous system and the patterns of how our brain is talking to itself? From the diet standpoint, it's pretty obvious. The United States has a pretty crummy diet, But the one rock that nobody really likes to look under, that is speaking directly to Danielle's point, is environmental toxicants. And two big ones stand out for Parkinson's. One is lead and the other is pesticides. Mm-hmm. These are both been heavily linked with onset of Parkinson's disease. I've seen a number of, we have people coming in from across the country, and we've had several from the Midwest, big farming areas, and stories of, oh yeah, I was riding on the back of the sprayer while my dad was dragging it through the fields. We were spraying glyphosate and Roundup on everything. And yeah, how did I get leukemia? How did I get lymphoma? Why is my brain not working anymore? And particularly, I have a tendency to get off on tangents, and I'll turn this into like an hour-long lecture on things. So if you feel the need to interrupt me, please feel free, because I will carry on interminably otherwise.
Well, the thing that I loved about the farmer talking about the chemicals, he was directly being doused in chemicals.
Yeah.
But what hit me about his story was he said, not only am I sick and everyone in my town is sick, this is our food.
Yeah.
This is our literal food supply.
Yeah.
This is our cornflakes and our, this is what we're feeding our children.
And this actually goes directly to Parkinson's, because what happens is, say you have your standard aluminum skillet and you throw in some tomato sauce or some other acidic product. Well, now you're leaching the aluminum out of the skillet. Now, if those tomatoes happen to have been treated with glyphosate, or anything else you're putting in there happens to have been treated with Roundup or glyphosate was originally developed as a descaling agent for metal pipes. So there's this thing in chemistry called valence, and valence means a positive or negative charge associated with a particular metal. So aluminum oftentimes will have a +5 to a +7, iron will have +3 to +5, things like that. Well, what the glyphosate does is it takes that positive or negative charge and makes it neutral. Well, now that aluminum that was in the pan, in the presence of the glyphosate, has now become effectively electrochemically neutral and can pass immediately from your stomach straight to your brain. Aluminum is another, link with Parkinson's disease, along with many other, Alzheimer's and tau protein and all this other fun stuff.
So if you're talking to a group of people, because obviously, Robert, I imagine you have an audience of people who have Parkinson's or who have a family member with Parkinson's. One thing you would do is clean up their environment. So 100%. But then you're saying they need to look at what is already in their bodies.
Right. It's called total body burden in environmental medicine, and this is why I have that second rule. It's always about everything. You weren't born with Parkinson's. You weren't preordained genetically at age 67. You're going to start having cogwheel rigidity and a shuffling gait and blank faces or anything like that. It was cumulative over time. There is always a straw that breaks your camel's back. But your camel would have been perfectly fine had it not been for all the straw they were already carrying. And that's really the issue, is that total body burden. This is why within any given family, you can have one person that's desperately ill from the same exposure and somebody else is going, what's wrong with you? I feel perfectly fine. So, it's individual and it's total body.
What are some things that, if you had a magic wand and you said, I have a big group of Parkinson's people in front of me, what are things that you would suggest that they have checked?
Gosh, well, certainly, when you're talking about the ability of the brain to be in a what we call a neuropermissive environment, Dr. Mark Gordon actually came up with that word as neuropermissive, and that is under what conditions is the brain there to be able to do the best job it can. Well, the neuropermissive environment means balanced neuroendocrine system. So, having a proper balance of the hormones, and even things like the sex hormones that people associate with reproduction actually are very important for the brain to function effectively. This is on top of the usual things we associate with the brain, like serotonin and dopamine specifically in the case of Parkinson's. So, having the appropriate hormone balance systemically, not just central nervous system, is important. Avoiding of the things that induce inflammation. So now we're back to the clean diet, and we're back to not pulling the fire alarm in the brain, and, clean air, clean food, clean water. And what do I need to do to help my body dump the toxins that are already there? And, am I paying attention to my blood pressure? Am I sleeping well at night? Am I getting enough oxygen while I'm sleeping? Do I have sleep apnea? Mm-hmm. Do I have, all these things cumulatively impact the quality of the life regardless of the diagnosis.
Roger, so I'm curious, you've had your foundation since 2004?
2004.
Yeah. So and you've written a book, which we got a chance to look through that earlier. So what are you most commonly seeing, and with all of your research that you've done with Parkinson's patients?
So what my research has revealed, just as Dr. Bauerschmidt was describing, there are a multitude of factors that cause these symptoms. It's almost limitless and almost surprising. What I've discovered actually is, in my interviews with people across the globe, is most people I'd say 95, 98% of the individuals who go to a medical professional and who have a diagnosis of Parkinson's are told that this condition is degenerative. And when the person goes home, of course, they get traumatized. They're awfully upset. And worse, they believe it. They decide, okay, I've been told there's no chance that I'm going to get better. Now, sometimes what the medical professional will tell the particular patient is, okay, look, you're going to get worse, but we've got maybe some medications that might slow down the progression. Now, when they use the word progression, they don't mean it's going to be getting better. They mean the progression means it's going downward. So, okay, you can take this particular medicine, and the research would indicate that maybe instead of going this way, you'll go a little bit more gradually. Well, that's not very hopeful. So I think people basically leave with the depressing feeling that there's nothing they can do. There are no options available. And after 20 years, I thought at the beginning that I would identify maybe 5 different kind of therapies approaches. Of course, detox would be one of them. But, we would be able to organize a system and a program of recovery for people that would be simple, that they could follow, and that would enable them to get well. Well, as it turns out, that's not the case. Everybody's situation is different, and there is no set of a number of therapies that are going to help everyone. And what we found is that I've counted now 120 natural approaches, natural therapies that are helping some people recover. Not everybody, but what you find is if you look at any one therapy, I've now documented evidence that would show, oh, look, these individuals found that doing this or this therapy has been particularly instrumental in helping them to be able to celebrate a relief from their symptoms. So we know that there are answers, but that's why Dr. Bauerschmidt's work is just so powerful and so helpful, because what he's doing is he's looking at the causes and addressing those causes.
That's right.
Yeah. And that's, I'll tell patients also, and forgive this analogy. I hope you bear with me for a second, but you've got somebody, you've got an angry bear, and it's one thing to try to give the bear a little bit of Ativan and quiet him down. But if you don't find out who's sticking him in the ass with a stick, making him angry to begin with, you're never going to have a quiet bear. And so I'm all about finding the guy with the stick. And the rock that nobody seems to want to look under is the environmental component. And it's really kind of sad because, when I assume looking at a picture, we're about the same age. I was born in 1954. And at the time when I was born, the only 2 problems in the world were heavy metals, which had been around since the Bronze Age, and mold, which is mentioned in Leviticus. But nobody knew anything about mold other than, it was growing outside, because nobody really cared because it was everywhere anyway. But then in 1948, A.I. DuPont came up with this thing, which was marketed in 1954 as Teflon. And Teflon, as we now know, is a forever chemical that is a huge hormone dysregulator and disruptor. But ever since then, it's been a mad dash of better living through chemistry. And it's gotten to the point that as of this year, for every living man, woman, and child in this country, I could take a dump truck and dump 250 pounds to 500 pounds of chemicals in their front yard on a daily basis, is how much we've got in our environment right now. And then on top of that, in the 70s, when we had the OPEC oil crisis, remember all the speed limits went down to 50, 55 miles an hour. That was a minor inconvenience. But the major problem was that they changed the building codes to make the homes more airtight so they could conserve on the cost of the heating fuel for the winter, particularly in the Northeast. Well, that air tightness now decreased the circulation of air through your home, and now you've got all this off-gassing from the paints and the furniture and the fabrics and the finishes on your hardwood floors and, the Glade plugins and the Febreze fabric softeners and all the smell good stuff that people wanted to have to cover up the smell of the mold that they had in their house and to get rid of the musty smell. That indoor air pollution actually became worse than outdoor air pollution. And then on top of that now was this new thing called electromagnetic frequencies, or EMFs, which we're literally bombarded with. I mean, everything in our office is hardwired and minimal exposure to anything. And we're supposed to have, exposure would be great at anything less than 100 milliwatts or microwatts per meter squared is great. Everything in our office is hardwired, but just from people the stuff coming from outside and from the neighbors, offices and things, I'm registering easily 5,000-6,000 microwatts per meter squared just in a very protected office. People will walk in with the earbuds or the smartwatch, and my meter will pick up 1.4 million microwatts per meter squared. And people are walking around with these Bluetooth headphones. Mine's wired, just for official, mine is wired here. These Bluetooth headphones, and it's not only is it going from the computer to the headphones, but it's also going across the brain and literally frying your brain, because we know the electromagnetic frequencies open up the voltage-gated calcium channels on the cells. You open these things up, calcium floods in, and oxidative stress and oxidants flood out, particularly in the form of this stuff called peroxynitrate, which is the singularly most caustic substance our body knows how to make. It's what we use to destroy bacteria and viruses and cancer cells and dead cells in our body. And we're exposed to this on a daily and oftentimes 24-hour-a-day basis, particularly now with 5G and all the satellites and all the antennas sticking up everywhere.
So I feel compelled to add something to this, because I feel the anxiety of the person listening, like, oh my God.
But the idea is that we can protect ourselves to a degree, but there are also steps we can take at home to help our body detoxify better. Because, we use the word detoxify rather liberally, but it's really not quite accurate. Our body actually should go through a process of depuration or cleansing. And the distinction lies in how our body gets rid of things. It's actually a 3-step process. The first thing we have to do is take something that our body has and turn it from something it can't get rid of, or lipophilic, and turn it into something we can get rid of, or hydrophilic, or water-loving. So it goes from fat-loving to water-loving. So many of these toxins are stored in our visceral fat and in our fatty organs, or liver and things like that. That's the first step. But the second step is then you have to be able to attach it to a molecule to get it out of the cell. This is called, phase 2. Then phase 3 is getting it out of the body. But oftentimes between that phase 1 mark and the phase 2 mark, you can take something that is less toxic and turn it into something that is more toxic. So now if you have an accelerated phase 1 process, but an impaired phase 2, which many of us do, methylation is one of the big things. So people are walking around now, everybody talks about the MTHFR gene defect. Well, 40% of us have it. 10% of that 40% have it really bad. But the bottom line is, if you have any kind of impairment in that second phase, you can actually build up a toxic burden quicker. So if anybody out there is a drinker, you know that you have some people that sit there and they kind of can toss them back and toss them back and toss them back and don't seem to be impaired at all. Well, they've got a real good phase 1 process, and they're turning that alcohol into acetaldehyde. But then there's that same group is likely going to wake up the next morning with a horrible hangover that lasts for a lot longer than it should, because their phase 2 is diminished. They can't get it out of the body once they've converted that alcohol into that acetaldehyde. That's an example. But that can happen with a variety of different chemicals and medications in particular. You'll take the prodrug that gets turned into the active drug, and then the active drug hangs around in the system longer because the body can't get it out of the body. And if you've ever been told don't drink grapefruit juice when you take this medication, that's a pretty good example of that impairment that occurs, where you can build up a level of a toxic metabolite as a result of taking a medication. By taking the grapefruit juice with the medication.
Now, when you've said to me, I really like to see Parkinson's patients early.
Yeah.
If someone has an early diagnosis, I really like to see them quickly, because I want to see what is going on that is causing the neuroinflammation.
Right. And the other thing is, if you're starting to have symptoms, Parkinson's disease, the degree of your disability is related to, do I have any substantia nigra left to make the dopamine? Well, you don't lose it. It's not like a light switch. You turn it on and off. It's either on or it's off.
Right.
There's grades and there's degrees. And if you can find out what it is that's causing that neuronal death, that's like lead or pesticides, and get them out of the body, I can't fix something that's structurally changed. I don't have the capacity at this point to resuscitate dead neurons. Okay. I can't turn them back on, but I sure as hell can stop them from dying.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's different
than
slowing progression.
Yeah, because the slowing progression is they're just replacing the dopamine. They're just trying to replace the stuff that's not being made anymore, as opposed to stopping the reason that it's not being made to begin with.
Okay, I think that's a really important point. Really important point.
Yeah.
So if you had an early diagnosis, you would start looking for
lead,
chemicals,
aluminum,
heavy metals in the body,
mercury,
neuroinflammation, the questionnaire that we have at the center would ask a lot of questions that would go all the way back to birth.
Yeah. Well,
Because we're
yeah.
looking for what is the total exposure of this person over their entire lifetime.
And
That's
just a little hint, probably one of the, the questionnaire goes on for several pages, as you know. But to me, the singularly most important question on there is, do you have a reaction if you're exposed to smells or odors? Like if you walk by a perfume counter, do you get a headache or a nausea? Or do you feel like that one of us has got to leave kind of feeling? Perfume counters, candle stores, new car smell, Bed Bath and Beyond, Bath and Body Works, any place with heavy fragrance, even the soap aisle at the grocery store or the fertilizer place at Home Depot or Lowe's. If you I just can't go in there, I feel bad when I'm around that, your total body burden has exceeded your body's ability to deal with it, and you need help now. You need to get in a sauna. You need to, engage in even colonics and find somebody that knows how to engage in desperation or cleansing and not just simply take a supplement. And there's a whole reason for that I can go off onto another tangent if you're interested.
But but if you simplify it, it's like it's not pushing more in. If your bucket's full,
yeah, we got to get it out. We got to empty the bucket.
It's not about pushing anything in.
We got to dump it out.
Let's dump the bucket.
Yeah.
And let's reset.
Well, I want to hear a little bit more because I feel like we have Dr. B here, we have this researcher here, and he has this book with a lot of knowledge and tips. Tell us a little bit about the book that you wrote and, if you can give anybody listening out there some, they recently had a diagnosis of Parkinson's or maybe they've been bouncing around to different doctors and, how can we give them hope? What should they do? And what kind of advice with all the research that you've done, where should they start?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first place to start for anyone who has been formally diagnosed is to acknowledge and honor the fact that the body knows how to heal itself. It just needs support. It needs to be able to remember how to do what it knows how to do well. The body knows how to cleanse itself out of toxins. And so sometimes you just have to realize, oh, wait a minute, something's out of balance here. And as Dr. B has so eloquently presented, there are many, many reasons, many, many toxins, many, many different factors that influence these symptoms. So one of the great secrets of healing is get the bad stuff out first. What my research has also revealed is, of course, those thoughts will affect everything. So if I think I'm destined to get worse, I will get worse, period. I don't care what else happens. Mm-hmm. But there is another underlying, from my research, influence that affects everything. And that winds up being trauma. So if you look, I've interviewed so many individuals, and for each individual, if we touch on the particular topic of traumas in their life, everyone will report oftentimes some very significant and serious and awful traumas that they've had. Some of them occurred when they were born, some of them childhood, some of them as adults, some of them recently. They had a horrendous marriage. They had a horrendous boss. It can be physical traumas, accidents. It can be even going to a hospital to visit a dear friend who is seriously ill. That's very traumatizing. So I think the problem is when a person has all of this trauma that, again, is stuck in at the cellular, at the level of the body, at the cellular level. The fact is that they will continuously be on alert. They will continuously be anxious all the time. If you're continuously anxious, that sympathetic nervous system is always on fire. People are go. The body can't sustain itself if it's always on full drive ahead. It just doesn't work. So how do you address that? Well, you can obviously address how you respond to anxieties and stresses that you experience, but also you can just recognize, look, these go back a long way. Maybe what I need to do is to begin to embrace some of these wonderful natural therapies that will enable me to purge out all of this trauma that, again, has been stuck like super glue at the cellular level in our body. Now, most people don't talk about traumas, but as I see it, that really is at the core. And one of the reasons why people do all these natural therapies, but they still confront problematic symptoms, chances are they haven't quite been able to find therapies that enable them to successfully release the traumas that have so plagued and dramatized their life.
And I would agree in large part, but I think the traumas because there's not a single patient that has come in that has not had a traumatic experience as a result of their illness, if not the cause of their illness. The problem sometimes I've had, one of my first patients actually wrote a book about it after she visited, after we were treated with me, and it turned out that she was having anxiety for a good part of her life, but it turned out her daughter was also anxious at age 16 at the time, but she had been anxious her entire life, and it really went back to the time of birth when both of them almost died during the birth process because of complications. Mom went into shock, and her daughter was born in horrendous circumstances, and neonatal intensive care, and mom and daughter separated for the first few days, and so it was. I mean, this kid was born having pulled the fire alarm in the brain. Now, that said, there's also other factors for folks, and trauma, to me, emotional traumas are just part of that total body burden. And anything we can do to reduce the burden is going to positively impact their health. So whether we attack the trauma first, or we attack the chemicals first, or we attack the diet first, really is of little consequence. They all have to be dealt with, because it is always about everything. And I also agree that, when how people look at their state, I deal with a number of cancer patients as well. And, the folks that do the best are the ones that kind of go, that have practiced, are able to practice acceptance and gratitude, and accept the fact that the cancer diagnosis was made, and then take the steps necessary that they want to take to make their life as fulfilling as they can, and be grateful for that opportunity, as opposed to the folks that do the worst, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, are the ones that say, I'm going to beat this. I don't care what it takes. I'm going to beat this, because they have automatically set themselves up to be in a battle with the cancer, and they're always in fight or flight mode. And if you're in fight or flight mode, you cannot be in rest and repair mode. These two positions cannot be held simultaneously in the body. So the more you're yanking that fire alarm, I absolutely agree, the harder it's going to be to get better. And I think if you dig far enough, everybody's always going to have some trauma that they're going to be able to uncover. And I mean, life is that way. And I agree it's part of the total body burden, but I resist the idea that it is the impact or the reason. I think it is a reason. It is another reason, but not necessarily the reason that people crash and burn.
So we use at Deeper Healing, we have brain align neurofeedback
Right.
that really helps reset the nervous system and takes people into that parasympathetic. What do you do? And with your research, what do you recommend people do to help with the nervous system and the trauma that they've had? Are there things that they can do at home, or are there therapies that they should seek out? Like, what does the research show?
Well, I think it depends on the individual and what their proclivities are. Some people find meditation is very useful. Other people simply cannot do that. Other people find mindfulness is something that really makes a big difference. So we've got a lot of wonderful books and researchers we've interviewed who talk about how helpful mindfulness is. And of course, that's just a very large, cumbersome word that just says, be in the present. Don't worry about the future. Don't agonize over the past. Just be in the present. And of course, that makes a huge, huge difference. So I think there's some things that people can actually do on their own by recognizing that they can reset their neural system. And of course, one of the other wonderful recommendations that's also easy to do is to do something different every single day. Crawl. Now, we crawled when we were little, but if somebody will actually, even if they are 65 years old, if every day, if they will just spend a couple of minutes crawling on the floor, maybe with their children or grandchildren, they'll find that they are forging new neural networks, which makes a huge difference. A lot of people will say when I make this kind of recommendation, so look, I do crossword puzzles, and I'm always challenging my mind with trying to solve those difficult challenges. Well, that's not doing something differently. So the idea is brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. I mean, anything that you can do that is not a routine function will enable you to be able to forge new neural networks. And actually, what's interesting is even if physically a person is at the stage where they are seriously disabled, if they simply think about doing this function, just process through what it might mean, they can still forge new neural networks. Now, there are some clinics, just like your clinic, that I really recommend people go to, because you have a very systematic way of being able to look at the causes of these particular conditions. Most people will pursue medical treatments, and they'll go to medical professionals that prescribe medicines, which is fine, but that's not looking at the underlying cause of these symptoms. We've also identified some cutting edge therapies that wind up being the delivery of frequencies. So when frequencies, the right frequencies, are delivered through sound and or through light, we're seeing, in terms of the research evidence, amazing and remarkable results. So there's something called photobiomodulation. Now, that's a big, heavy, terribly awkward word. The reason why they created that word was that's really low-level laser therapy. And you'll find when you do research that that's labeled as the therapy back 30 years ago. But the researchers could not agree on how low is low. So they changed the name. Most people don't know what that is, but it's just literally light therapy. There's been some devices that have been invented. We first interviewed one of the companies that was creating these devices back 6 or 7 years ago, a company called Violite. They were creating these little devices and had no information about whether or not it would help persons with Parkinson's. Well, they wound up doing a study of people with Parkinson's and found remarkable results. And that particular therapy has been one that researchers are on the bandwagon. If you do a research just for 2025, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of studies that are ongoing or have been published of people who are using an analysis of using photobiomodulation therapy to affect a variety of different diseases. One of them that I'm most excited about is autism, children with autism, or even adults. They found that in this wonderful study, they have marvelous results in using this particular therapy. You've got TBI, traumatic brain injuries. Even if a person has been injured 2 years previously, they're still getting some results. Obviously, better to do it at the very beginning. So in other words, I'm saying that for people who are discouraged, there's nothing out there. We find that these new therapies, the delivery of sound therapies, the analysis of voice profiles that gives indications of what's out of balance in the body, and then giving back to the body the frequencies that the body needs. Those kind of therapies, I think, are the future of medicine. And so we can really all be quite encouraged to know that there are a lot of answers out there that are present now and that will be coming down the pike in the future.
Amazing.
Yeah, and from my perspective, that's great for fixing the problem that exists. My goal is to get rid of the reason for the problem to begin with.
Yeah. I'm curious. This is a really random question, but I would like to know, and I guess, and there might be a number out there. What is the youngest person diagnosed with Parkinson's that you know of?
I mean,
Because you think about it being like an older person.
I've seen them in the
disease.
40s. I mean, in 40-year-olds.
Like, do you know anyone like in their 20s or 30s? Because I always hear they're older, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Listen, I'm 70. 40 is not old.
Older, I'm just thinking, I had a friend who had a brother and he was in his 40s when he passed from
Yeah.
Parkinson's. So it was, but I didn't know if it's something that's becoming more and more common and we're seeing Parkinson's now at a younger age.
Well, we're seeing everything at a younger age. I
I
mean,
know.
there's 20-year-olds out there now that have abysmally low testosterone levels from environmental toxins.
Yeah.
I mean, I just did a review today, a 14-year-old who has a testosterone level of 25. Now, a 14-year-old male with his estrogen level literally was 25.1. His testosterone level was 25
Oh my goodness.
at 14. It's like this kid, like it should be 700.
And why is that? Explain that to our listeners. Why we're seeing such low T.
Well,
low
it's
testosterone.
it is. I'm absolutely convinced it's the environment. It's all the and phthalates are huge hormone disruptors, and phthalates are in all the plastic water bottles.
But it's binding
It's either interfering with production or it's interfering with the receptor sites. So if you look at hormones as cellular messengers, and this is the same true whether you're talking about the neuroendocrine system or the endocrine system for the rest of the body. Your neurotransmitters, your hormones are cellular messengers. They're telling the body what it wants it to do next. Well, if the message can't get through because of receptor site blockade, I don't care what your hormone level is, you're going to have the symptom of deficiency. The problem with this is the production never comes online with these teenage boys. And, they're walking around, glued to the video game because they've got no ambition, and they're depressed and they're irritable and they're cranky. And it's like, check their testosterone level and get them away from the crappy food and the plastic water bottles, and life will be better. We are getting the equivalent of a credit card's worth of plastic every week if we're eating a traditional standard American diet. There's a 19-year-old I'm aware of whose mom found Viagra in his room because he can't get an erection. It ain't got to do with the fact he doesn't have a girlfriend. It's got everything to do with the fact his testosterone level's in the tank. And he's cranky and he's irritable and he's losing muscle mass. And we're poisoning ourselves, and it's showing up with earlier onset of neurodegenerative diseases. It's showing up with autism. It's showing up with ADHD. It's showing up as earlier heart disease and strokes. And I mean, you name it, it's happening because we're slowly killing ourselves by how we're living and eating and not taking care of our environment.
Yeah. Well, Robert, tell everybody how they can get your book.
Oh, well, it's Road to Recovery from Parkinson's Disease. It's on Amazon. We have a number of different online courses for individuals that are interested in understanding what might be affecting their symptoms and what can they do about it using some natural approaches and therapies. The main website is parkinsonsrecovery.com. And I know my members of my audience will be most interested in learning more about Dr. Bauerschmidt's clinic and how they can get involved with that. So I'd really love for him to talk more about what would happen when one of the members of my audience would make an appointment with him.
I would love to talk about that, Robert, not to jump over you. I handle a lot of the onboarding, so I know this really well. If they go to, so there's two things that I think would be really important for your audience. One is for anybody out there, a guidebook to help them with their lifestyle things, which is just being clean living. The second thing is if they want to become a patient, deeperhealing.com, there's a form and a phone number, and we have people who will help them. We have people from all over the world, all over the United States. We can do a remote and then figure out what are the next steps, what makes sense for them. He always says with Parkinson's, sooner is better. Sooner is better. Don't wait until things have really gotten very deteriorated, because he feels like we can do the most help by getting to those root causes and reversing them back. We do everything in-house. We do the testing. We have literally everything in place. They may be recommended a stay and heal program where people come in for an intensive, and we will literally clean them, like clean their body, soup to nuts. And it's very, very powerful. You can see lots of that information on all our platforms, including on our site itself. And soon this podcast will be out there for them as well, so they can dig into this issue. And honestly, I think filling out just the questionnaire, the questions that we ask, who are like, whoa.
I didn't realize this could impact me.
Yeah, like no one's ever asked me this before.
Yeah, and it's very individualized. Every person that comes in, I think that's the thing too with our practitioners is they're really going to sit down and listen and get that whole history, do a lot of digging. When we say we go deeper, I mean, there's no pun intended there.
We look for diet, we look the emotional balance, we look for the environmental factors, we look for what's already going on physically, we figure out an elimination plan, and then what we need to do to rebuild.
Yeah, and there's a lot of blood work that's usually involved. There's usually some specialized testing. Some people come with some, which is good, but I mean, heavy metals, molds, pesticides, I think for those listeners that are out there that are like, really, what are they going to do? How are they going to dig deeper? It's really looking at a lot of environmental factors that you may not even know that are contributing to your health that no doctors have ever talked to you about, that we are actually able to do testing and discover what is causing the damage and the inflammation to the brain and your mitochondria and your cells, and causing the deterioration and the rusting that Dr. B was talking about earlier.
And to kind of wrap this up with a nice bow, Robert, you said something that just hit my heart, which is this. When you get a diagnosis like Parkinson's or something serious, degenerative, and they tell you there's nothing that can really be done here. And you get home and you go into that mental dark place of belief level. When you said you've seen the opposite, and when you've said you've seen the opposite, like none of us is getting out of here alive, but if you can do anything to extend your quality, give yourself more quality, and know at the end of all of this, your body's always in healing mode. There's never been a truer thing said. And I know both of you have seen that and are witness to that. I'm a witness to that. I've seen thousands of people come through that have been told there is nothing that can be done. They've been to the top hospitals, they've been to lots of doctors, and they have recovered. I've seen it. So
Come into a wheelchair and 12 weeks later be out
they
driving
walk
your own
out.
car again.
I mean, you could, those stories are there. How did you find us, Robert? I keep meaning to ask
Oh,
you that.
one of your clients with Parkinson's told me about it and said, well, you need to investigate that. And I thought, oh, this will be wonderful to interview Dr. Bauerschmidt because I want more people to visit your clinic, which, by the way, we want to make sure everybody knows it's in South Carolina. Is that
It's
right?
in
Yes.
South Carolina.
Charleston,
Yep.
beautiful
Deep-
place to visit.
Deeperhealing.com. It is a very beautiful place to stay and heal. It's beautiful weather, and it's a very clean area, and our center is incredibly clean, and it's made for people who are compromised. So we're prepared for you. We're not afraid of those hard cases.
Well, thank you for being there for all the members of my audience. It makes a huge
Aw.
difference.
Thank you, Robert, for elevating this conversation,
Yes, thank you
and
so much
for your
being
for your
here.
20 plus years of research.
Yeah, it's
My pleasure.
it's important work, and thank you for doing it.
We hope this episode inspired you. Here's how to go deeper. Visit deeperhealing.com to become a patient. Online, we have loads of courses and a free toxin quiz. Subscribe, and please, please share this episode with someone who needs it. It's always that one-on-one support that really gets people to find deeper healing. Remember, this is educational content, not medical advice. The information shared here should be discussed with your own personal healthcare provider. If you're excited by listening to the medical experts or the personal recovery stories on here and you want to start your own deeper healing journey, go to deeperhealing.com and start your process.